Hey, darlings, how y'all? I just want to come on here and talk about Christmas. That's not my favorite time of year. But one of the reasons that Christmas is not my favorite time of the year is because my first Christmas with my love in 1983, he was in basic training. And back then, they didn't let anybody go visit anybody around the holidays. Uh, but it was December 11th of that year, my oldest son was born. And December 13th, my husband had to leave for basic training. Now, my son was not supposed to have been born until late January. So probably his dad would have been able to come back by then be able just to see for a couple of days before he went on to training. He wouldn't have been able to stay. But I always joked and said my son wanted to come out and see him early. So on December 11th, I had an emergency C-section. And I was in the hospital on December 13th when my husband come by in the morning, because back then they didn't let men stay up at the hospital like they do now. Different world. Come by to say bye because he was leaving, him and his dad. His dad was a wonderful man. I miss him. He passed in 2018. That's another love story I'll have to tell you about his mom and dad's. They passed in the same year, but they were older too, older than us. But, he left for basic training on the 13th, and I was in the hospital. Well, back then, when you had a C-section, they would keep you in the hospital for 3 or 4 days. So on the 14th, I went home with his mom and dad, and I was blessed that they could take me in and help me because my mother's health was not in any good shape, and we didn't have a car or anything. And she lived in the city, but we didn't have a car. But we went out to their house, and they lived out in the country, about 2 hours from the city. Well, an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on the time of day. And we didn't have no running water. We barely had electricity. I'm shocked that it hadn't got turned off because they didn't have any money to pay the light bill that year. So, of course, we didn't have no Christmas. But that was the least of my worries. I had the best gift in the world. I had a beautiful 6-pound, 6-ounce baby boy. He was 6 weeks early, and he was premature, and he was jaundiced, and he had to stay in the incubator, but only for like 24 hours, and then I got to take him home. But as a first-time mom, I thank God for my mother-in-law and father-in-law supporting me, and all his brothers and sisters, because he was the oldest of the family. But he was in basic training in Lackland, Texas, because he was in the Air Force, and we were in Oklahoma. And on the day of Christmas, we went into town because his aunt and uncle, we had some really good aunt and uncle that lived there. We went into town to see them, and he was going to call. And for some reason that day, they had gotten in trouble in training, or something had happened. And back then, that's the first thing it did, took phone privileges away. Even if it was Christmas, because the military was a lot different back then. But he didn't get to call. We waited all day, and he didn't get to call. So I went home. I mean, of course, my aunt and uncle, his aunt and uncle, not my aunt and uncle, but his aunt and uncle, but they're my aunt and uncle too, but they had lived there, and we had dinner and that kind of thing. But that was my first Christmas with my husband. After, like I told you in part 1 of my Christmas story, that the first 8 years of my life, Christmas wasn't very great, and then after that, until I met my husband, Christmas wasn't good either, because we never had no money to celebrate. We never had no money for nothing. But that's back when I thought that money was what it was all about. You had to buy gifts and do all that. I mean, I knew Jesus and I knew God, but I was still young. It took me a long time to come around to where I'm at today. I knew about it as a child, but I hadn't had a great childhood, so I just didn't really understand it. Because my father he preached a lot. And if you go to church and you have someone that preaches a lot to you, and then they go home and do totally different, it's hard to be the best believer. But that's another story for another day. Just like someday I'll have to tell you about my husband's mom and dad's love story. They passed away, I want to say it was 2018, within the same year, within a few months of each other. Very sad. But they were older than us. And I think Dad died of a broken heart. Pop. That was my husband's dad's name, Pop. Well, back to my story. In 1983, like I said, my son was born December 11th. My husband left for basic training, and we were living out in the country with no running water and waiting on the electric bill to get cut off. But my husband was on basic training, and I didn't get to talk to him that day. And it was because I found out later they had been reprimanded for something that the unit didn't do or something. So I had to wait 2 weeks until he called again I thought I was going to get to talk to him on New Year's Eve, but I didn't get to go into town on New Year's Eve because the weather was too bad. In Oklahoma back then, you get ice storms, and back then, Pop didn't have that great a car. The tires on it were Maypops and Skidmores. So we didn't get into town, so I didn't get to talk to him for 2 weeks. And then I found out that he had hurt his ankle in basic training, and he was in a lot of pain. But my Christmas present that year was the best Christmas present I ever had. It was my oldest son, who I love very much. And then my husband, of course, who was in basic training, doing what he had to do to support us. Because, like I said, we didn't have nothing. And if I look at everything I have today, it's all thanks to my husband. So he gave me many Christmases. So that was my first Christmas as a married woman, and my first Christmas with my son. Well, God bless y'all. I'm going to get on here in a little bit and tell you about another Christmas, also having to do with my son, my oldest son. And God bless. Y'all have a great day now.